Hi, Steve Elliott here, continuing my journey, making the transition from a traditional artist to a digital painter. This is a 16 by 12 inch watercolour painted in Artrage. What I did with this, I started off with taking a photograph when I was walking through my local town, Derby in the UK, and I got it home and I thought this is going to make a nice painting. However, I wasn't happy with the composition as it was in the photograph, so as you see, I produced a sketch which is in the right hand side of the screen, and I changed the size of the buildings on the right hand side. I didn't want them to compete with the cathedral and overpower it, so I reduced the size of them to similar to the buildings in the shadow on the left hand side, just to make the cathedral more dominant in the picture. And also, when I did the actual sketch, I decided that there was a lady on the right of the picture in shadow. I moved her over to the left hand side of the picture, more onto the golden mean, and then I had a few more folks in the street scene just to make it look like the town wasn't deserted. The golden mean, by the way, is the concept of splitting your paper into thirds and then positioning key points of the subject on those thirds. So the actual lady in the painting isn't strictly positioned bang on the golden mean, but it's sort of around there. But I think it's well balanced. Before I start painting, I lock the drawing layer so I don't start painting on top of that, which I do have an habit of doing. I create a new layer. I don't change the blend mode. I leave that to normal, and then I use the watercolor brush. I change the size of the brush 500%. That's because I'm working on a fairly large painting, 12 inch by 16 inch at 300 dpi. The only downside I find with digital painting, trying to do watercolor or oil color for that matter, is I can't get a brush as big as I would if I was doing an actual painting. If I was working on a watercolor, I quite often use decorators brushes so I can get a color over a complete sheet in a matter of seconds. So where I am limited somewhat to the size of the brush, but 500% is about as large as I can get it, and I start working in the sky. I'll then blend that out using the harsh chaos brush. This is a word I'm seem to have a struggle with that. I was struggling in the last video with that. So I use the harsh chaos brush, or I should say palette knife, to blend out the colour. Here I decide the lady's head is too big, so I rub a little bit of the head away. And what's cool here is I use the colour sampler to pick the colour around the head, to sample that, and then repaint that back in seamlessly, so you don't see the sort of the join, if you like, where I've repainted over the area around the head. Now that would be really difficult to do in watercolour, almost impossible, because you'd really struggle to mix that same colour again. So I have to say that is a big plus when you're painting digitally. So working back into the cathedral, I start adding detail, and I have to say I'm not really into detail much at all, so it's more of a representation of the detail, nothing too precise, and I'm just looking at sort of shadow shapes and painting those in. Again, not getting fussy with the detail. Being very conscious about not painting detail. I'm trying to paint in a loose style, not following lines too closely, and I'm using that harsh chaos brush palette knife to soften off the edges all the while, and keeping it a very loose painting. I create a new layer and I start painting a grey purple over the buildings and the areas that I want to be in shadow. I change the mode to multiply and I adjust the opacity slightly until I get the depth of shadow that I require on the painting. Another cool feature about this is I can erase areas of this dark colour that I've applied where I noticed I'd made a mistake. If I was doing that in watercolour, and I generally use a colour called alizarin crimson in shadows, and alizarin crimson is a staining pigment. You will not get that out of the paper. Once it's been put down, it's staining. So it's really nice to be able to use the eraser and just remove it from the painting as though it never existed. Something you cannot do in watercolour without also damaging. You could probably lift it out, but you would damage the painting underneath that shadow colour as well. I'm now back in the original painting layer, adding more details to the buildings on the right. Again, not getting fussy with detail, just putting some colour in there and strengthening it up a little bit. What I do now is create a new layer, and I do something that you just would not do at all if you was painting traditionally, and I start trying colours on the actual painting to see what they look like. If I was doing that on a traditional painting, I would have a bit of scrap paper and I would have put down the original colours and then laid these other colours over it, if I'd have had the forethought to actually paint the original colours onto the scrap paper first. So it's pretty much an impossible task to do if you're painting traditionally. Digitally, it's not a problem. I just tried the colours and I thought, oh no, that's not working, and just removed them. By the way, I set the blend mode to this layer to multiply. Here I create another new layer and I set the blend mode to lighten, and then I start painting in people's faces and heads with a light cream colour, and then I'm switching to the multiply load and sort of put it in body form, if you could call it body form. It's a very loose style of painting, you can't see any detail in the faces or anything, really just blobs of colour that sort of insinuate that there are people walking down the street. At this point I decide that I want to bring the buildings forward a bit, so I add some cool blue to the sky, and I also put a little bit of the same colour in the left hand side of the shadow buildings, just to bring some balance to the old painting as regarding the colour. at the painting now, I have a real disaster on my hands. I'm seeing a cathedral, a negative space, and a column of a side of a building all competing with each other for dominance. And I'm thinking, this is not working. The composition is wrong. I didn't see it when I started. And I would, if I was painting this on watercolour paper, I would rip it up and start again and change the composition. Luckily, it's not an actual traditional painting, it's a digital painting. So I make the bold move of flattening the three layers, the lighten, the multiply and the original layer together, and then draw a marquee around the buildings on the left, and I move them in to change the width of the side of the building by about 50%. Once I've moved the buildings, I create a new layer and use a very thick paint, or opaque paint I suppose, not thick at all, opaque paint, by reducing the water content of the brush, and then I start painting over the building and filling all the spaces that have been created by moving the building centre left. So, big plus for digital painting. I would have had a duff painting on my hands at this point, but I haven't now. I've salvaged it and I can continue. Painting the flags was something I was really looking forward to, because I felt the old painting there was lines surging vertically but nothing going horizontally to break that pattern. So putting the flags in, I think, really makes this painting. It breaks up those vertical lines and ties the whole thing together, and I really enjoyed painting this part. just adjusting the size of the people in the midground to give a more balanced perspective. I know you're not supposed to continue working on a painting once you have signed it, that you should sign it once the thing is finished, but I can never resist that last little tweak. And I stood back and looked at the painting and I thought, these posts on the right hand side look like a line of soldiers. I needed to do something about that. So I used a technique which I employ a lot. This will work in watercolour or digital, it doesn't matter. And I balanced light against dark, so where the posts were in shadow I painted them lighter, and where they were in bright light I painted them darker, and that way it just broke up those lines of dark colour. And that is pretty much the finished painting. Thanks for watching my video. I hope you liked it, and if you did, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.